The soldier came home after 10 years to find his life had been buried, and his wife was about to marry the men who had helped shovel the dirt. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a sigh of metal and pressure that released him back into a world he only recognized in photographs. Staff Sergeant Cole Anderson stepped down onto the cracked asphalt of the depot, the air thick with the smell of diesel and damp earth, a stark, clean contrast to the perpetual dust and scorched metal that had filled his lungs for a decade. The sky was a muted gray, heavy with the promise of an afternoon shower, a gentle gloom he had desperately missed. He slung the duffel bag over his shoulder. It was heavy, packed with the meager possessions a man accumulates when his entire existence is lived out of a bag, but its weight was nothing compared to the load he carried inside. The straps dug into the muscle and bone of his shoulder, a familiar, grounding pressure. This was real. He was home. The plan had been simple, rehearsed in the long, dark hours on transport planes and in sterile debriefing rooms. He would surprise her. No call, no email. Just appear on the doorstep like a ghost made solid, a prayer answered 10 years too late. The army had done its part, keeping his survival off the official channels until he was stateside and stable. They owed him that much. They had declared him missing, then killed in action, a clerical error born from a firefight so chaotic it had swallowed his entire unit whole. For 2 years, he had been a name on a memorial wall. For him, it had been a blur of captivity, pain, and a miraculous, brutal escape. He walked. The taxi stand was bustling, but his legs craved the feel of his hometown under his boots. He moved with the steady, ground-eating pace of a man accustomed to long marches, his eyes scanning everything. Habit. He assessed the quiet suburban street, the neat rows of houses with their sleeping windows and manicured lawns. Threat assessment, 0. It was peaceful to the point of being unsettling. There was the oak tree where he'd crashed his bike when he was 12. The corner market with the faded soda sign in the window. The Turner's house, still painted that same awful shade of yellow. Each landmark was a small, reassuring anchor, holding him to the reality that this place had waited for him, unchanged. It was a lie, but it was a beautiful one to believe for a few more blocks. He turned onto his street, Elm Street, and his heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of hope and fear. He could picture Sarah inside, maybe making coffee, maybe reading by the window. Her face, memorized from a single worn photograph he'd kept tucked in his body armor, was his North Star, the image that had guided him through the abyss. Then he saw it. The house. It was wrong. The lawn was too perfect, edged with a precision he never possessed. The trim, once appealing white, was now a crisp, clean gray. A new, unfamiliar silver sedan sat in the driveway, gleaming under the overcast sky. By the front door, a small, decorative flag with a floral pattern fluttered in the breeze. It wasn't theirs. A cold dread, slick and immediate, began to seep into his veins. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't a house that had been waiting. This was a house that had moved on. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the key on the chain around his neck. It was the same key he'd left with. He slid it into the lock. A moment of resistance, then the familiar, sickeningly smooth click of the tumblers falling into place. The door swung inward on silent hinges. He stepped inside. The air was still and quiet, carrying a faint, clean scent that wasn't Sarah's perfume. It smelled of lemon polish and something else, something vaguely masculine, a cologne he didn't recognize. His combat senses, honed to a razor's edge, flared to life. He wasn't clearing a hostile building, but the instinct was the same. Scan. Assess. Identify the threat. The living room was neat, almost sterile. The old, comfortable couch they had bought together was gone, replaced by a modern leather sectional. The photos on the mantelpiece were different. A few pictures of him in uniform remained, pushed to the side like relics in a museum. In the center, dominating the space, were photos of Sarah with another man. A smiling, handsome man with kind eyes. They were on a beach, in a snowy landscape, at a family picnic. They looked happy. Terribly, painfully happy. He moved into the kitchen, his boots making no sound on the new tile floor. It was a slow, deliberate patrol through the ruins of his own life. The threat wasn't a hidden enemy with a weapon. The threat was everywhere. It was in the coffee mug with a different man's initial on it sitting by the sink. It was in the grocery list on the fridge, written in Sarah's familiar looping script, with items he'd never seen her buy. And then he saw it, lying on the polished granite countertop, innocently placed next to a stack of mail. It was a wedding invitation. Heavy, cream-colored cardstock. Elegant, embossed lettering. His world, which had been slowly tilting, suddenly capsized. The words swam before his eyes, burning themselves into his mind. Together with their families, Sarah Elizabeth Miller and Mark Allen Peterson request the honor of your presence at their wedding. Below it, a date. This coming Saturday. 3 days from now. The air rushed from his lungs. The duffel bag, which had felt like a part of him, suddenly became an unbearable weight. He let it slide from his shoulder, and it hit the floor with a heavy, muffled thud that echoed the sound of his heart hitting the bottom of his soul. His knees felt weak, the bones turned to water. He gripped the edge of the counter to keep from falling, his knuckles turning white. The hum of the refrigerator became a roar in his ears. The ticking of the clock on the wall was a countdown to an execution. This was an ambush. The most effective one he had ever walked into. No bullets, no explosions. Just a piece of paper that had detonated his entire world, leaving him standing in the smoking crater of what used to be his life. His training screamed at him. Exfiltrate. Regroup. Gather intel. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't be found here, a ghost haunting the scene of a life he had no part in anymore. He backed away slowly, deliberately, not touching anything, leaving no trace of his presence. He pulled the door shut behind him with a soft, final click. The street looked the same, but it was alien now. The gray sky pressed down on him, suffocating. He didn't know where to go. Every instinct told him to find Sarah, to demand, to rage, to break down the door of her new life and show her he was real. But another, deeper instinct, the one that had kept him alive, held him back. You don't charge a fortified position without intelligence. There was only one place. One person who might have the truth without the emotional shrapnel. The old stone church of St. Jude stood sentinel at the edge of town, its steeple a landmark for the lost. Cole found himself standing before its heavy oak doors, a sinner seeking sanctuary he did not feel he deserved. He found Father Michael in the rectory, tending to a small garden of wilting roses. The old priest looked up, his eyes clouded with age and confusion. He saw a stranger, a gaunt man with a haunted face. Then, recognition flickered, followed by sheer, unadulterated shock. Cole. My God, it can't be. The shears fell from his hand, clattering on the stone path. It's me, Father, Cole said, his voice a dry rasp. They sat in the priest's quiet study, the air thick with the smell of old books and beeswax. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Cole didn't know where to begin. He didn't have to. They told us you were gone, son, Father Michael said, his voice gentle, laced with a profound sadness. They told the whole town. The army sent representatives. There was a ceremony. Cole stared at his hands, resting on his knees. They were scarred and calloused, the hands of a survivor. There was a mistake. A mistake, the priest repeated softly, the word wholly inadequate. Cole, we buried you. I presided over the service myself. We presented Sarah with a flag. The whole town came to mourn. She fell apart. We all thought we were going to lose her, too. The story spilled out, a torrent of grief and reconstruction that Cole absorbed in stunned silence. He learned how Sarah had withdrawn, how she had become a ghost in her own house, haunted by his memory. And he learned about Mark Peterson. A good man, a widower himself, who had lost his own wife to cancer a few years prior. He had found Sarah in her grief, not as a predator, but as a fellow survivor. He didn't try to replace you, Cole, Father Michael explained, leaning forward, his eyes pleading for understanding. He helped her live again. He brought her back from the edge. It started with him just mowing the lawn for her, then bringing her groceries. It grew into friendship, and from there, love. The kind of quiet love that grows in the soil of shared loss. They healed each other. Each word was a measured blow, dismantling Cole's anger and replacing it with a vast, hollow ache. He couldn't hate Mark. He couldn't even be angry with Sarah. She hadn't betrayed him. She had mourned him. She had buried a husband, grieved him, and then, after years of desolate solitude, had found the courage to build a new life on the foundations of her own heartbreak. He was the one who was out of place. A ghost who had forgotten he was supposed to be dead. "She is happy, Cole," the priest said, his voice barely a whisper. "For the first time in years, she is truly, deeply happy." The words hung in the air between them. "She is happy." It was a verdict. A final judgment on his return. His reappearance wasn't a miracle. It was a complication. A disaster. He left the church and found the cheapest motel on the edge of town, a place of peeling paint and flickering neon that matched the state of his soul. He paid in cash for one night, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. For hours, he stared at the textured ceiling, a landscape of sterile white peaks and valleys. The ghosts of his past paraded through the room. The faces of the men he'd lost in the ambush. The face of his captor. And Sarah's face, laughing in the sunshine with another man. What was his duty now? The soldier in him knew about objectives, about missions. For 10 years, his mission was simple: survive, get home. He had completed it. But what now? What was the new objective? He could fight. He was her husband. The vows they took said, "Till death do us part," but he had died, hadn't he? In a way, the man she married was gone, lost in a dusty ravine halfway across the world. The man who came back was someone else, a harder, colder version forged in pain and isolation. He could storm the castle, reclaim his queen. He could stand up at the wedding and declare himself. He imagined the scene, the gasp from the crowd, Sarah's face draining of color, Mark's confusion turning to horror. He could win that battle. He could reclaim his house, his wife, his life. But it would be a conquest, not a homecoming. He would be taking a life she had built, not returning to the one they had shared. He would be destroying her peace, the very thing he had always sworn to protect. His duty. What was his duty to her now? Was it to claim her, or to protect her? And what if protecting her meant protecting her from him? The long night bled into a gray, somber dawn. The decision settled in his heart not with a clash of certainty, but with the quiet, heavy resignation of a soldier accepting an impossible order. He knew what he had to do. His war was over. Hers deserved to be, too. He found a piece of motel stationery and a pen. The words came slowly, painfully. He didn't write of his anger or his pain. He wrote of his understanding. He wrote that he had seen her happiness, and that it was the only thing that made sense in a world turned upside down. He wrote that his final mission had been to make sure she was safe, and that he could see she was. He folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it to Sarah. He didn't go to the house. He went to the park. The one by the river, with the old willow tree where they'd carved their initials inside a lopsided heart 15 years ago. He knew she came here sometimes. It was her place of quiet reflection. He sat on the bench and waited. An hour later, her car pulled into the lot. She got out, her movements distracted, her face etched with a pre-wedding stress that seemed trivial now. She walked toward the willow tree, her head down. Then she looked up. And she saw him. For a moment, she just stared, her face a mask of utter disbelief. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a small, strangled sound escaped her lips. She looked like she was seeing a ghost, and in every way that mattered, she was. Cole stood up slowly, keeping his hands open and visible, the way you would approach a frightened animal. "Sarah," he said. His voice was steady. "Cole," she breathed, the name a fragile question. "No. It's not possible." Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock, of confusion, of a grief she thought she had already processed. "I'm real," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I never wanted to do it like this." She took a hesitant step toward him, then another, as if drawn by a force she couldn't control. The space between them crackled with a decade of unspoken words and a universe of what-ifs. "I know about the wedding," he said, getting straight to the point. No sense in a protracted engagement. "I saw the invitation. I talked to Father Michael." The relief on her face was instantly replaced by a wave of crushing guilt. "Oh, God, Cole. I thought you were dead." We all did. I mourned you. I swear, I know, he interrupted gently. You don't have to explain. You don't owe me an explanation. He saw the man Mark was, reflected in the peace she had found. He saw the years of loneliness she must have endured. He's a good man, Sarah. She flinched at the question, but nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face. He is. He saved me. Then he's doing my job, Cole said, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he knew they were true. My only job was ever to keep you safe and happy. Looks like he's better at it than I was. Don't say that, she sobbed. It's not. What do we do? What do I do? This was the moment. The point of contact. He could pull the pin, tell her to call it off, that he was home now. He looked into her eyes, and he saw not just love for him, but a terrified, exhausted love for the life she had managed to build from the wreckage he'd left behind. And he made the choice. He chose her. Which meant letting her go. You do nothing, he said, his voice firm with a terrible resolve. You get married on Saturday. You live a long, happy life with a man who loves you. You build a family. You forget about the ghost you saw in the park today. I can't, she whispered, her whole body trembling. How can I? Because I'm ordering you to, he said, a sad smile touching his lips. Staff Sergeant's orders. You're being honorably discharged from me, Sarah. Your tour of duty is over. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. He placed it in her trembling hand. Don't read this until after. After you're his wife, he held her gaze for a moment longer, memorizing every line of her face, the face that had been his only map home. Goodbye, Sarah. He turned and walked away without looking back. Every step was an agony, a march away from the only home he had ever known. He could feel her eyes on his back, but he didn't falter. A soldier completes his mission. For months later, Cole was living in a small apartment 3 states away. The town was unremarkable, which was exactly what he wanted. He worked at a lumber yard, the smell of sawdust and fresh-cut pine a clean and simple therapy. He spent his days stacking wood and his evenings in a support group with other men who were haunted by different kinds of ghosts. He was learning to build things again. A letter arrived one afternoon, forwarded from Father Michael. The return address was unfamiliar, but he recognized the handwriting immediately. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a photograph. It was of Sarah and Mark, standing under the old willow tree. They were holding hands. She was smiling, a real smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile of peace, not of rapturous joy, but of a deep and settled contentment. He turned the photo over. A few lines were written on the back in Sarah's looping script. You gave me back my life twice. Once when you loved me, and again when you let me go. I will never forget you. I hope you find your peace, Cole. You deserve it more than anyone. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He looked at the photograph again, at the woman he had loved enough to lose. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel regret. He felt a profound, aching sadness, but beneath it, there was something else. A quiet sense of release. He taped the photo to the wall next to his window. He looked from her peaceful face to the unfamiliar street below. His old mission was over, its objective complete. It was time to start the new one, building a life from the ground up, for himself. One day at a time.